Well, hi, you guys. Today I wanted to tell you a true story about a very good friend of mine because I think this really illustrates a lesson for anybody watching and listening to this video. I've had a lot of good friends over the years, and my friend Tom was a very good friend of mine. And I wanted to tell you about Tom because I think people can relate to this story I'm about to tell you. My buddy Tom lived at home where he grew up, and upon his parents passing away, my friend Tom inherited the farmhouse where he was raised. He lived on a rural farm. And by the time Tom became an adult, the farm was no longer operating. All the outbuildings fell into disrepair. The tractors that his dad and his grandfather once ran sat off far out back in the weeds, rusting away and succumbing to the elements. Farm implements with brush and vines growing over them, and the farm was no more. The fields hadn't been worked in many, many years. It was very overgrown. And eventually, the farm was basically non existent as the buildings deteriorated and collapsed, and the earth overtook them. But Tom remained on the property after his father and his mother passed away, and he lived there all by himself. He worked a job that was only 5 miles away for many years. And Tom's favorite thing to do when he would get off from work and go home, Tom spent all his time at home on that farm property. It totaled 88 acres of rural farmland with woods. And Tom loved to spend all his time there. You could always find my friend Tom at home. He had a 2-car garage adjacent to his house, and that's where he spent all his time. He had like a man cave in there. He had a large TV, a stereo system, an old dilapidated secondhand couch. He had refrigerators in there, freezers. And my buddy Tom was a huge Buffalo Bills fan. Never missed a game. And he also was in NASCAR. Dale Earnhardt was his favorite driver. Huge NASCAR fan. So everything in Tom's garage was Buffalo Bills, like banners and posters and NASCAR. And my friend Tom was a bad alcoholic. He loved to drink beer. Tom always had a beer in his hand. Rarely did you ever see him without a beer. He was a guy that also, unfortunately, would drink and drive. And he had been caught doing so several times. And, he comes from that same rebellious era that I did, growing up. All the things that were available to us as kids, the parties, the friends, the good times. But Tom was always there, doing the same thing day in and day out. But my friend Tom was a guy, and I don't mean saying this in any disrespectful way. It's just I'm telling you the way it was. Tom was a type of guy that was extremely hard headed, fast to anger, had a severe temper, and everything had to be his way. He was very controlling. He wanted to control everything in his life, everything. He was in control. And if there was something that Tom couldn't control, he would get highly upset. He would get very angry if things weren't the way he wanted it to be. And Tom was a very smart man. He was a mechanic. He could fix anything. He really knew a lot of stuff. And this one particular year, everything and anything that could go wrong for Tom did. It's like everything around him, one by one, started falling apart. He was struggling to pay his taxes, and he would complain and complain about it. Yet his taxes weren't much at all. They were $2,700 a year. And I remember telling Tom, I says, be glad you don't rent. I says, you've got all this property. I pay over $6,600 in rent a year, way more than what he had to pay. But Tom only looked at his situation and never compared it to others to see that he was indeed blessed with all the property that he had, living out in the country, and really seeing how good he had it, because he did have it good. But for some reason, my friend couldn't see it. He only saw the side that bothered him. And he was the type of guy that never picked up the phone in his garage because he had a secondary landline in his garage. And I remember visiting with Tom, and we'd be watching a Bills game on a Sunday afternoon, and the phone would ring. And I says, are you going to get that? And he says, I never answer that phone, because it was usually telemarketers. He was the type of guy to where if Jehovah's Witnesses came to his door, he'd ignore them. And if someone tried to call him, he wouldn't answer the phone. Tom was very old school. But this particular year, everything started to fall apart, and his job became in jeopardy because he was having car trouble. He had this little car, a little silver Cavalier, 4-cylinder. And there was something wrong with the fuel supply to it, like the injectors. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was something wrong with it. And he didn't have the time to work on it himself, though he tried. And he just couldn't seem to get this car to run right. So he hired his neighbor down the road, who was also a mechanic, but a better mechanic, to take the problem on. And so I went down with Tom to take the car down because it ran crappy, but it ran enough to get it there. And then I gave him a ride back to his house. And I says, and when your car's ready, we'll go back and get it and I'll take you down. I helped my buddy Tom anytime I could. And he says, well, I'm not going to worry about that right now. He says, I'm going to let, what's his name, work on my car. He says, I was wondering if you could do me another favor. And I says, what's that? And he says, if I pay you, would you go with me to go get a refrigerator? He says, one of my fridge in the garage quit, and it was one he kept all his beer in. And this refrigerator that he was interested in was 30 miles away one way. And I says, yeah, I'll help you, but you're not going to pay me. And so he went in another vehicle that was a loaner, and I followed him because I had a truck then. And he made the deal. He bought the fridge. He helped me load it into my truck, and I drove it back to his house. And that's where we unloaded it, right in the driveway, right in front of the garage. And the overhead door was up. And he says, well, let's just move it over here and we'll stand it up and let it sit for 24 hours so the Freon and everything can, settle, and, what you have to do with a refrigerator after you move it. And he says, and I'll just leave the doors open to it so it can air out, and we'll just leave it here unplugged and let it sit overnight with the garage door, overhead doors up. I was like, okay. And then he pulled out his wallet and he says, I want to pay you. And I says, no, you're not paying me anything. I says, friends don't charge friends. You're not giving me any gas. You're not paying me for my time, nothing. And Tom really had a lot of problems going on. He was having home problems. He was having major health problems. problems at work, problems with his car. His refrigerator died. He was worried about his taxes. He had all these things going on, as well as maybe other things that he just didn't share with me. He seemed like he was very troubled. And I could tell he was going through a very rough patch because everything was like coming at him at all angles at one time. And it can be overwhelming for anybody in that situation. I've been there myself more times than I care to admit. I know the feeling. It's awful. But Tom was trying to deal with everything alone and tackle everything by himself. You know, he's got to be in control. And I never, ever, in all the years that I known my friend and been around my friend, did I ever hear him say anything about prayer. He wasn't even the type to say, well, I hope to God this works out, using the word God in the sentence. He just never, ever talked about anything outside of his own power to do anything he could do. It's like he didn't trust anything but himself. Tom only trusted himself. He trusted me as a friend, but what I'm saying is he didn't rely on anything outside of himself. If he couldn't handle it, he would flip out because it was all up to Tom. Everything. He really relied on himself for everything. And so as all these problems were going on, financial, health problems, problems at work, automobile problems, you name it, right down to the refrigerator crap in the bed. The thing that Tom didn't know, and I didn't know, is that after I shook his hand that evening, after we got the refrigerator back to his house, and I told him, and this was on a Friday evening, I told Tom, I says, well, I'll see you tomorrow, buddy. And I shook his hand, and he thanked me for all my help with taking him down with his car. And I even took him to a junkyard to get another part because they wanted to see if the fuel rail maybe was bad on the car. So we made a couple trips to get different things for his car. And then we dropped it off at the friend. And then he thought it was fixed and brought it back home. And then it quit and we had to take it back down again. And by this time, he was livid. Not at his buddy, but at the problem the car was giving him. He was just angry as could be. And so that evening, with everything that was going on, I shook his hand and I says, I'll see you tomorrow, Tom, because I planned on going back up Saturday, late morning, and help him move the refrigerator up against the wall in the back of the garage where it was going to replace the one that didn't work. And I was even willing to take the one that didn't work to the transfer station to have it recycled. But what nobody knew, including Tom himself, is that that evening he went into his house, he cracked open a cold beer, went into his living room and sat down on his couch. And right after he sat down on his couch, he died. Dropped dead. Right on his couch. And his head went back and fell on the back of the couch. Saturday morning, before I was to go up there, another friend of ours, Todd, who lived way up the road from Tom, usually would come down on weekends. It was just a normal thing to see Todd stop by, and he was such a cool guy. Todd is another friend. And Todd and Tom went to school together. They were the same age, 53 years old. And Todd came down to visit with Tom to see what was going on with his car and everything. And he saw the back of the couch away from the sliding glass doors on the back of the house. And he saw Tom wearing his baseball cap and his head leaning back on the couch. And he figured Tom was asleep because he was knocking on the door and there was no answer, but the door was unlocked. So Todd slid the sliding glass doors open. He went in. He says, "Hey, Tom. Tom." And as he walked around the couch and came around to the front where the coffee table was, Tom was gray. and rigor mortis had already set in because he died Friday, the evening before. So he had been dead for hours. And the beer can was still near his hand, tipped over, spilled all over the couch. Tom never even got to drink his beer. You see, the message in this is that people spend their lives with their meaningless problems that will work out. See, Tom wasn't the type of guy that always had that in the back of his head that it's going to be all right. Things are going to work out. Don't stress over it. It was like with Tom, it's the most important thing right now. It's like I can't think about anything but these problems. It's like these problems have got to get solved or I can't go on. It was everything to him. And lots of people live their life like this. I've even done it myself. I'm not perfect. I've been there. But the difference is I'm a firm believer in God and Jesus Christ. And when things are out of my control and I know I can't control it, that's when I leave it up to him. And I ask for his help. And I say, this problem is much greater than me, God. Please help me with this. Tom was not the type of person to do that. If Tom had a problem, it was up to Tom to fix it. But if Tom knew he would be dead that night, do you think he would have stressed over that refrigerator? Over his Cavalier not running good? His taxes? His job? Anything else that may have been bothering Tom? All the health problems he had that he ignored because he was hell-bent on never seeing a doctor. If you mentioned a doctor to Tom, he'd be like, I'm not seeing no damn doctor. And yet he had this huge lump on the back of his head. If he took off his baseball cap, you could just see this big egg sticking out on his scalp. He had health problems and he never got medical attention for anything because Tom was very hard-headed. You guys, there is nothing in this world worth stressing over so greatly. And if you live your life where you believe you are the only one in control and you are the only one that can fix your problems and you are the only one that can figure things out and you are the only one that is going to be in control of everything, you are badly mistaken. Badly mistaken. You know, it talks in the Bible about the rich man that stored up and saved and hoarded. And after he did all that, the following day he was dead. It was all for nothing because tomorrow is promised to none of us. So like Tom, that stressed over what he did today was dead tomorrow. It's pointless. I think if Tom would have known that he only had hours to live after I shook his hand and told him I'd see him Saturday morning, the only thing that would have been on Tom's mind is the fact that he was going to die. He no longer would have thought about the fridge, the taxes, the car, nothing. He would have been worried about what was going to happen to him and where he was going. Tom just didn't ever think about stuff like that. Tom didn't worry about stuff like that. Shirley never mentioned it, not to me. And it's just ironic that Tom was always like that, always trying to be in control. I got this. I'll do it. He didn't even like the people he worked with. He would run them down constantly. This stupid person did this at work, and this guy don't know how to do his job, and I'm sick of working with these morons. Because Tom had all the answers, and everything he did was better. His way was better. There was no compromise. And I worried about Tom when he passed away. But I do remember there was a day when I was visiting with Tom in his garage, and he was sitting, just a few feet away from me. And because the way Tom lived his life, he was also a very stingy, greedy person, not the type of person that would be willing to help somebody if they needed help. His attitude would be F them. And it's the reason why I asked him what I did this one day. I says, Tom, can I ask you a personal question? I said, it's none of my business, but I'm curious. And as a friend, can I ask you a personal question? And he says, sure, what? I says, do you believe in God? And he just looked at me a second and kind of hesitated. And he said, yeah. That's all he said. Yeah. And that was it. I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything more. I just wanted to know, because in my eyes, it always seemed like Tom was in trouble. And I was concerned about him. And I hope that was real and true, what he told me, because if he did, that's good, because that would make a big difference when he died. So my message to you is don't struggle over stuff, you guys. I seen it firsthand with Tom, with what was going on with my friend. I saw it in the worst form you can see it, where everything in his life was falling apart and going wrong, and what it was doing to him. Sometimes you just have to let go and let God handle it and forget it and trust that he's going to handle it. Because I am telling you right now, God's honest truth, that every time I was faced with a problem where I didn't know what I was going to do and I left it up to him, it worked out beautifully. The problem completely went away. And there is nothing in this world worth stressing over. I don't give a damn if it's your job, your automobile, your rent, your mortgage, whatever it might be. All problems can be resolved. They all can be resolved. And then you all know, whenever you've gone through a major problem that really bothered you, you know you've been there. We've all been there. And then once it's resolved and you are on the other side of that issue and you look back and reflect and say, why did I stress as bad as I did? And you almost feel like a fool, don't you? You kind of feel stupid that you let that problem affect you as bad as it did. And it resolved. It got solved. It was fixed. Remember that. So when the next one comes, just know and say to yourself, it's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. There is nothing in this world worth stressing over. All this is temporary anyway. This furniture I'm sitting on, the lamp next to me, the curtains, everything's temporary. It's all meaningless stuff. Tom stressed over his meaningless stuff instead of looking at how blessed he was. Yeah, he was having car trouble, but at least he had 88 acres of land, and it wasn't the end of the world. He had other ways to get to work. He had the money to buy a different vehicle. He was just stingy and tried to squeeze anything he could get out of something right up to the bitter end. And it was all for nothing. Because not only was he worried about he was going to lose his car, lose his property, lose his job, lose a refrigerator, lose his beer. He was worried about everything he was going to lose except his life. And that's what he ultimately lost. That Saturday morning, the garage doors were still open. The refrigerator was still sitting there, unplugged, upright, with the doors open, airing out. His car was still down at his buddy's house with the hood up. The tax bill was still on his coffee table. His job was still waiting for him to come in Monday morning. But Tom was dead. Dead. When Todd found him. And then I got the phone call later that morning, just before I was ready to go up to his house. His brother called me and said, Kevin, Tom is dead. It was a shock. He was concerned with everything he could possibly lose but his own life. And that's what he ultimately lost. The one thing that was more important than any of the things he was stressing over. The very thing he was going to lose was the thing that his mind wasn't even on. He had no idea what was coming, but he was about to lose the biggest thing of all. And all the rest of it did not matter. Know what you have, appreciate what you have, give thanks for what you have, and don't stress over stupid, temporary problems or things. Be grateful and ask God for help and give your life to God. Because if he calls you home, like he did Friday evening for Tom, you're going to want to be on the right side of things. There's nothing more important than that. Thanks for watching, you guys, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.